It's not easy because I don't know that we've been socialized to always see partnerships as a positive thing, right? And so, what I would say is take the time to build trust within a relationship, to know how much you can give and grow and be honest and put into that relationship.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Pushing Your Peace podcast. I'm your host, LT Bourne, and today we're thrilled to have the remarkable Yolande Robinson join us. Yolande, a passionate educator with over 24 years of experience, shares her insights on my new book, Happy, the Peace to Push to a Happier Life. On this episode, Yolande dives into the importance of partnerships in her career and the unique partnership with her husband, Honorable Jamell Robinson, the Deputy Premier of the Turks and Caicos Islands. She also discusses her P, perception, emphasizing the need to see the world through the eyes of others. Yolande's journey from founding the Learn and Lead Educational Center to hosting the Shifting Perspective podcast is truly inspiring. Her dedication to education and empowerment has touched countless lives. As a devoted mother of three, she embodies wholehearted living and joy. Join us for an enriching conversation with Yolande Robinson on Pushing Your Peace podcast. Let's get ready to push some peace.
Yeah.
I first and foremost thank you so much for being a guest on the show. You are someone that's read Happy, the Peace to Push to a Happy Life. And I want you to
Yeah.
share briefly that experience with the audience.
Yeah, I'm a big reader. I'm a big consumer of information. And as you write about in your book, I do think that it's very important that we're always looking for that next level of knowledge. And there was a point when you were talking about in your book how, when you worked at Aminiara and how you'd run in there to see what people were reading, and you realized that how important reading was, right? And I'm along that lines as well. I haven't always had as much time for reading, but I would say in the last 6 to 7 years, I've made it intentional about putting in a certain amount of time each day into my reading. I really appreciated your book. I thought it was extremely powerful. There's one of your P's, right? And I also appreciate the fact that there was a local context to it, and I love reading local authors here in Turks and Caicos, and it really reminds us of the power of the mind and how we approach things. And that's an interest of mine as well as a daily practice, because I think many of the things that you spoke about, they're great in principle, but they take a lot of work. And we have to be willing to look inward at the work we need to do before we can look outward. And sometimes we gravitate to looking outward before we look inward. So I really feel like a lot of your book really pushes the reader to look inward on how they feel about some of these P's and how they're doing them in their own life. And once you're honest with yourself, I think that it can be a really reflective experience. And, really want to congratulate you on writing the book because it's an awesome book. And I do think that it can be very beneficial to a lot of individuals. And I really never noticed how many words began with the letter P or such powerful words, and words that I use so
Indeed.
often.
Indeed, like that's something I realized. That's why obviously that's why I had to write it, in it, But it's amazing how many powerful words or influential words begin with the letter P. And one of the words that we're going to be talking about
Yeah.
today is something that I believe helped you along your journey, and that's partnerships. Now, you're somebody that wears a lot of hats.
Yeah.
And to wear a lot of hats, you need a lot of dependable
Mhm.
people. And I'm sure there's been a lot of dependable
Yeah.
people along your journey that's helped you to wear these many hats. So, and that's still helping you today. So share with us that experience, how partnerships has helped you along your journey.
Yeah, I think that partnerships are extremely important, and probably my view on them has evolved a fair bit. The partnerships that would have been really important to me in my teen years versus my early 20s, my 30s. And now I'm in my early 40s. I think I've looked at things from different perspective, and I see that I've also shifted in terms of how I see partnerships, not just in my professional life, but in my personal life. So I'm an educational entrepreneur, and that's not something that you find many of. So I'm always looking for, in my business, creative solutions to educational problems that we have. And the very first part of my business that developed was the intervention program. I have a specialty in dealing with things like learning disabilities. And so naturally, I looked for others that could help with that. And the strongest program at Learn and Lead that has the most people working in it is the specialized tutoring program. And I've been blessed over the last 15 years to have a lot of partners in that. There has been, this year made 15 years for Learn and Lead, and there's been over 40 teachers that have worked in the program. And I didn't realize that until I actually sat down and started counting them. So when I think of partnership, I think of that as well, is how many people have been part of this journey of building our organization. I also think of the partnership I have, because when you're an entrepreneur, you can kind of sometimes feel like you're a solopreneur because you have to solve so many problems and do so many things in your head. And I would say that over the last few years, I've really felt the importance of connecting with other entrepreneurs or other people, even in different fields, but that have similar situations. And so it may not be that we're partnering on a project, but that we can bounce ideas off of, that I can call and say, this happened today and it really didn't go the way I wanted it to go. Then obviously, one thing that's very important to me on a whole is connection. I believe beautiful things happen out of connection. I believe the best learning happens out of connection, the best products, etc. And a good friend of mine, who's actually my co-host on Shifting Perspectives, which is a podcast that I run, she likes to refer to her board of directors, and that's been a concept that I've certainly borrowed from her. Is because sometimes we go to different people for different things, and having a board of directors means that you probably have a set of people, and they don't have to be all in the same place geographically, that you feel comfortable with having certain conversations, getting certain advice, getting certain guidance. Because the person that I might go to for guidance in terms of my children and maybe things that I want to, and parenting that I want to see, might be different than the person I go to for guidance if I have something in banking to deal with. So I think whereas there was a point when I was looking for certain people to hold many roles in my life, I think that I've kind of moved to that idea of some people are in our life for a particular reason and even maybe a season as well. And so with partnership, I think it's being open to all the partnerships that are coming. Right. And of course, for me, one of the most important partnerships is with my husband. Right. And so we very much look at the things that we do in partnership, because although we do very different things in many ways, I do think at the core, a lot of our intentions are similar. And so that helps us tremendously in our partnership.
Share with us, Miss Robinson, sometimes we're afraid. We're afraid of getting hurt, or we're afraid of being taken advantage of. Like, how do you conquer your fears when it comes to partnering with people to progress either your career or your personal business, whatever? Like, how do you overcome those fears?
It's not easy because I don't know that we've been socialized to always see partnerships as a positive thing. Right? And so what I would say is take the time to build trust within a relationship, to know how much you can give and grow and be honest and put into that relationship. So, as much as I do believe in partnerships, I also think that it's important that partners are of similar mindset. They don't have to agree on things, on everything, but that there's certain core things that you want to see are there, that you want certain core outcomes. Fear is a very natural feeling that we feel, but I also think it's not something that should be ignored. So when you feel it, you might have to deconstruct whether is it just the fear of doing something new, or is it my instinct telling me, and take the time to investigate that, but don't allow one experience or two experiences to turn you off from partnership in other experiences, and know that you can have different types of partnership.
And Ms. Robinson, you happen to be married to the deputy premier of the Turks and Caicos Islands, and I have to ask you this question because my audience would want to know the dynamics.
Yeah.
We love business in this country, but it's more on the lines of partnerships.
Yeah.
My book highlights the importance of accepting differences
Yeah.
in partnerships. I talk about the dynamics that me and my cousin slash business partner has in the book, right? And the difficulties me and him having opposing personalities.
Yeah.
Him being high in disagreeableness, me being high in agreeableness, and how that kind of collides as business partners sometimes, right? But how do you and your husband, Honorable Jamell Robinson, navigate differences in your roles and responsibilities both in your personal life and also in your professional careers?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest things to highlight is, although my husband is deputy premier, I'm very proud of him for that and the work that he does. We've been together 20 something years. And so I didn't meet the deputy premier initially. Do you understand? And so I want to highlight that we've grown to where we are. We initially, became partners in 2001. So for some of your listeners, they may not have even been born, or they were little toddlers, or kids, or that type of thing. But we met in a stage where we were both very much, pursuing our passions and our purpose. And we were in university. We both went to McGill University. And at that time, I was president of the Black Student Network. He was president of the Caribbean Student Society. But I say that because although we have a lot of differences, one of the gifts in which we share is that our whys are very similar. So we may approach things differently, but we have a very common intention, and we're driven by many of the same things. So that also helps me to support him and him to support me. Even like I certainly was not given the vision to be deputy premier of the Turks and Caicos Islands. That was definitely, or to go into politics, okay, or to go into leadership. That's certainly a vision that he had for himself. He's always been a leader. In his own ways, but nobody would know how that is going to turn out. Now, I can support him in that. That doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with, or that we agree on every step and on how to do things. But what I would say why we do that partnership well, and me supporting him and him supporting me, which in turn it creates a very supportive family with our children, is because at the core, we are in agreement. So we're in agreement in a lot of things in terms of a intention and why we do what we do.
Ms. Robbins, I want to ask this question. Is there such a thing as 50-50 in partnerships? Is there such a thing? Or
Well,
is that like
are we talking marriage or general partnership, or, what?
I mean,
Tell me
in
what
any
you
sort of partnerships,
in any
because
sorts
I
of
feel like
partnership.
even with friendships, or anything, is there really such a
I
thing as 50-50?
I think if you go into things expecting 50-50, you'll be disappointed, right? I think there are times where it might be 70-30, There are times where it might be 50-50, but there are times where it may also be 20-80 because life changes, circumstance changes, different things change. And I think when you have a true partnership where both individuals are being authentic with who they are and there's trust built within the relationship, you have honest conversations about that. So, for example, as many of your listeners probably know, we have three kids. We have a 6-year-old, almost 7, a 9-year-old, and a 14-year-old. And it's not realistic right now for my husband to be as present as perhaps maybe he would like to be. But we have an agreement in partnership on how we're going to do things. So there's certain times where I may have a heavier load, but there has also been times where he's carried the heavier load. And so I think the most important thing is that the individuals who are in partnership are honest with what that partnership is going to look like. So even if you have a business partner, if you go into it 50-50, but somebody feels as though they're doing a lot more work than the other person, there's a resentment that can be built there. And so it's very important that you're clear when you go into situations as to what it's supposed to look like and the kind of outcome that you want to have, and that you're willing to have conversations and just say, you know, this week is tough. I just don't have it. Like I'm not going to be able to give you that 50%. This is what I can do, but maybe next week I can do that.
You know, I last question in the area of partnerships. You know, there's some people that aren't confrontational. You know, listening right now, and they're listening to you, and they want to be assertive. They want to say to their partners these things, but I guess they don't know how to say it, and currently that resentment is building up. What are some steps they can take to kind of to start to move in that direction and be more confrontational with their partners?
Yeah, I think the first thing is getting to the mindset where you don't see being assertive as confrontational, right? Because sometimes when we're not assertive and share what we really need or how we need it or what we can do, we might be more passive aggressive, where we are one way, but then we're like, but who do they think they are asking me to do? Blah, 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 blah. You understand? And so it goes from not being aggressive, but then going to maybe passive aggressive or even passive, and then that resentment growing. So I think remembering that communication is a skill, and it's a skill that improves with practice. So initially, it might feel awkward. You might feel worried about doing it, but do it in little bits. And I think over time, you'll be more genuine in how you do it, and more willing to do it. Because once we do it and we see and we get over maybe the worry of how it's going to come out, I think we are more willing to do it again.
Now, Miss Robinson,
Yes.
for your segment of the show, I already asked my questions. I already talked about my P, which is partnership. But
Yes.
on Pushing Your Peace, my guest has an opportunity now to talk about any word or words that begins with the letter P that has helped them along their journey or career. So this is your opportunity now to speak on any word that begins with the letter P that has
Yeah.
helped you along your way.
Well, I think you probably could guess the word that I'm going to say, although I like a lot of the words. One of the words that's very important to me is perspective. I have a podcast that's called Shifting Perspectives. And the reason that is, and to be honest, the word that when I was naming the podcast, which started in 2020, I wanted to use paradigm, which is another P word. And
Telling you.
yes, I tell you, these powerful P's, right? So if I connect those ideas of paradigm and perspective. So I first became acquainted with the word paradigm. I'm sure some of your listeners may have read that classic leadership book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. If you haven't read it, go out and read it, listen to it, etc. And one of his first few habits is paradigms. And he highlighted the fact that we all see the world through a certain lens. And that lens is made up of our experience, whatever our diversities are, our experience, our age, our nationality, our education, our religion, all of these things. But the thing is everybody has a lens through which they see the world. And sometimes we assume other people see the world the same way that we do. And I think that that is where a lot of our challenges come from, is when we are unable to see the perspectives of others. So the idea of kind of being able to shift your perspective is understanding that sometimes you have to borrow somebody else's lens to see the world the way they see it, to get a better picture. Because we all are our own main character in our heads. We're all the good guys in our head. We always look from our perspective. But that means that everybody else is looking from their perspective. And we live in such a diverse world now that diversity is just a fact that we're going to have. And there's no environment that you go into that you're not going to have differences. And I think in order to create inclusive environments where people will thrive and feel a true sense of belonging, and as though they're meant to be there, we have to be willing to look at things from different perspectives and get to know the perspectives of others.
I love that, but sometimes, what are some steps we can take individually? How do I now start to look at life from another person's perspective? What are some steps I can take right now?
I think the first thing, and that's not easy. And this stuff is work too, eh? Because we all have our own habitual ways of thinking. And so one of my interests is how the conscious and the subconscious mind works. And for anybody that's been in training with me, that I love to start by talking about mindset, because that really affects everything. And I think it's important to remember that we have a lot of thoughts during the day, right? Do you want to take a guess on how many thoughts, Mr. Lightburn? How many thoughts do you think we have during a day?
Well over 1 million.
You're an overachiever, right? Okay, so we have like 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, right? Which might feel like 1 million. But the thing is most of those are processed at the subconscious level. So we're not even aware we're having them. But then all our actions come from those thoughts. So I think one thing that's really important, if you want to shift your perspective or you want to work on your mindset, is taking some time to break down not just what might be happening consciously, but what might be happening unconsciously and causing you to behave a certain way. Because if we're always focusing on a certain type of thought, like if we go back to partnership and I focus on those people that disappointed me in partnership, then guess what I'm always going to see? I'm always going to see ways in which people have disappointed me. Right? And so I think with perspective, it takes work to focus on what is it that you want in your life and what kind of actions do you have to pair with a mindset to get it. And in your book, you refer to the fact that abundance is available for all of us. And the reality is many people do not have that belief. We've been socialized with a scarcity belief. And that's a lot of work to move away from that. But I think if it's something that you want to do, that's when you start taking in the knowledge. You start learning about these things. You start acting in these ways. You start practicing it. And you start to see it as a skill that can be improved.
Now you have a podcast called Shifting Your Perspective. Uh,
Yes.
do you have a book?
I don't have a book. One is coming at
Okay.
some point. But no, but
But
no,
I
but I do have a blog. And so there's
okay.
always my writing out there at
Okay.
learnandleadlimited.com.
Awesome. I'll make sure I drop that on the stream as well. But
Okay.
some people they want to start the work right now, and is there any books that you would recommend listeners getting to start their journey on seeing the world differently and I guess in a more positive light for them?
Um, I'm going to suggest two things. One of the books you actually referred to in your book was Carol Dweck's Mindset. So I think Carol Dweck's book is a really great starting point, as well as any of her TED talks. I also think that anything I think you would find a commonality in a lot of thought leaders that talk about being at your best. So your Mel Robbins, your Simon Sinek, your Dr. Joe Dispenza, um, all of them kind of refer back to how you set your mind and your daily practices that can be incorporated almost to make it part of like a spiritual practice. So I would say look into content from individuals that help people reach their potential through mindset. And I would also say that active things that you can do start with gratitude. We're kind of hardwired to look out for the threat and the things that can go wrong. But even just spending some time every morning to jot down 5 to 10 things that you're grateful for, that sets your mind up to look out for more of those things. So I would say start with gratitude as well as setting your intentions. Be clear on what it is you want. Now, your intention doesn't have to be your goal. You don't have to intellectualize it. It doesn't have to be a SMART goal, but simply what do you want? So if it is that you want to inspire, then when you start your day, focus on the fact that you want to inspire. If you want to be
Inspired.
productive, focus on the fact that you want, there's another P, to be productive, right?
Doctor, right.
And you'll slowly find that doing these things over and over without even much effort sometimes can start to shift your mindset because whether or not you set an intention, it is always there, right? So setting an intention to be productive versus walking into the office and looking at your desk and saying, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. They may be that you want the same outcome, but it's two approaches as to that outcome that you want.
Now, this part of the show is when I ask you a question that's completely has nothing to do with the show. So one of my trick questions I pull out
Okay.
of a hat. All right. So the question for this episode is,
I'll
what
try.
kind of animal, what kind of animal are you most like?
Oh, not one that I expected. If my children they're listening, they'll be like, you know how long we've been trying to get a pet? What kind of animal am I most like? I think I would choose an eagle. I think because I like to fly above situations and get a bird's eye view perspective from things before I jump in. Because sometimes, especially in the nature of my work, things may appear one way on the ground, but when I can see things from multiple perspectives, I start to understand the motivations of individuals a little bit more. And I think that allows me to approach situations with empathy and compassion, which eventually helps people reach their potential.
Powerful, profound. So we spoke about potential, we spoke about perspective, we spoke about partnerships. We pushed peace on this episode. I just want to thank you,
We
Ms.
certainly do.
Robinson, for being a guest on my podcast. It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you so much for supporting my project as well. I'm happy the piece to push to a happier life. Do you have any final words before you wrap up the show?
I
And
want to
please
thank you
plug
for
in,
having
please
me. It
plug
was
in your business too. Please plug in your business. Let them know where we can
okay.
find you.
Yes. So, first of all, I want to thank you for having me. It's a little odd for me to be on this side answering the questions versus asking the questions. But I truly appreciate being able to share my perspective on your book. And yes, like you mentioned, I have a podcast that's called Shifting Perspectives. You can find it on any podcast player, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, anything to that effect, and it comes out bi-weekly. As well as Learn and Lead Educational Center is located in Courtyard Plaza on the third floor, or you can visit us online. Our website is Learn and Lead Limited Ltd.com. If you Google us, you'll find us. And yeah, so that's about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've had Miss Yolande
Yolande
Robinson on Pushing Your Peace. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on the Pushing Your Peace podcast.
Thank you.